There are moments in life when the line between survival and sacrifice blurs, when a single act of kindness can change the course of fate. Eli never thought he'd find a lion in the wilderness, let alone one that would save him. But Kazi, a wild creature of the savannah, did just that. In return, Eli promised to keep him safe. 10 years later, when the world he had built without Kazi began to crumble, Eli found himself back where it all began, facing a lion who had once been his savior, now fighting to survive. The bond they shared, forged in blood and survival, would be tested in a way neither of them could ever have imagined. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parched savannah. Eli's boots kicked up dust as he trudged through the dry grasslands, his eyes scanning the horizon. The air was thick with heat, and the distant sound of chirping birds seemed like an echo from another world. As a wildlife researcher, Eli had grown used to the isolation of the African wild, but today something felt different. He couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. His instincts were sharp, honed by years of working in these lands. There was a strange unease in the air, a disquiet that prickled the back of his neck. As he moved forward, he noticed something. Out of place, a faint, guttural growl that didn't belong to the usual wildlife. The sound was raw, full of pain. Eli's heart skipped. He had spent months in these lands, studying the lions and other big cats that roamed freely, but he had never heard one in such distress. The growl sent a shiver down his spine. Without thinking, he followed the sound, moving toward a patch. A scrubby bush near a dried riverbed. There, lying beneath the brittle branches of a tree, was a sight that would haunt him forever. A lion, a magnificent creature. Golden fur matted with blood struggled in a steel trap. Its mighty paw was caught in the vicious jaws of the trap, the metal digging deep into its flesh. The lion was thrashing, growling in agony, its eyes wide with terror and confusion. Each movement seemed to tear at the wound, blood staining the earth beneath it. Eli froze, his breath catching in his chest. His first instinct was to run. He had heard of lions attacking when they were injured or scared. But as his eyes met the lion's, something in the animal's gaze stopped him. There was a moment of silent understanding, an unspoken plea for help. The lion's amber eyes flickered, filled with pain but not with aggression. Eli's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. This is no ordinary lion, and this is no ordinary moment. His years of research and fieldwork told him that he had to act quickly. A lion's injury could spell death, either from blood loss, infection, or predators. The trap would only make the situation worse if left unchecked. Eli's hands trembled as he fumbled with his backpack. He didn't have much with him, just the essentials for his fieldwork, but he knew he had to do something. He pulled out his knife, examining the trap. It was a cruel thing, built to maim, to kill. His breath quickened as he studied the mechanism. Could he do it? Could he free this beast? The lion's growls faded as it exhausted itself. It lay still for a moment, breathing heavily, its massive chest heaving with the effort. Eli took that moment to approach, moving cautiously, his eyes never leaving the lion's face. He spoke softly, trying to calm the creature. His voice was shaky, but he tried to convey calmness in every word. "Hey there, big guy," he whispered, moving closer. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help." The lion's ears twitched. It was clearly still on edge, its body tense, but Eli could see the faintest flicker of curiosity in its eyes. He took a deep breath, crouching low to the ground, trying to make himself as non-threatening as possible. For a long moment, nothing happened. The lion remained motionless, watching him warily. Eli's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to free the animal. There was no time to waste, but he needed to act carefully. He couldn't afford to make the lion panic, or he might turn violent. Eli carefully approached the lion's injured paw, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The lion flinched as his fingers brushed the trap, but he didn't growl. He was still watching Eli with those large, intelligent eyes. It was as if the lion understood that this human meant no harm, that perhaps, just maybe, he could be trusted. Sweat dripped down Eli's brow as he worked at the trap's mechanism. His fingers were slick with the heat of the day, the metal cold against his skin. He used the knife to pry open the latch, trying to be as gentle as possible. But the more he worked, the more the lion's breathing grew erratic. The sound of the lion's distress tugged at his heartstrings, pushing him to work faster. Then, with a sudden jerk, the trap opened and the lion let out a deep, shuddering growl of relief. It was free, but the lion didn't run. Instead, it collapsed. Onto the ground, its injured paw curled beneath it. Eli took a step back, unsure of what to do next. The lion's breathing was shallow, its golden coat stained with blood. The huge creature seemed too weak to stand, but it didn't retreat into the brush. Eli knelt beside it, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the lion's ragged breaths, could feel the heat radiating from its massive body. The pain in its eyes was undeniable, but so was the faint flicker of gratitude. "Hey," Eli murmured, wiping sweat from his forehead. He reached into his bag for the first aid kit he always carried with him. He didn't have much, a few bandages, antiseptic, some gauze, but it was all he had. "You're gonna be all right. I promise." For hours, Eli stayed by the lion's side, cleaning the wound on its paw, applying antiseptic, and wrapping it in gauze. The lion didn't fight him, it didn't run. It simply lay there, its chest rising and falling with each breath, watching. Eli with those intense, sorrowful eyes. As the day turned to evening, Eli made a decision. He couldn't leave the lion alone, not now, not like this. So, he set up a small camp nearby, keeping the lion company as it rested, offering whatever comfort he could. The lion didn't leave. And neither did Eli. By the time the sun had set, the world around them had quieted. The savannah was a vast sea of stillness, broken only by the sounds of the distant night creatures stirring. Eli, exhausted but strangely content, looked at the lion one last time. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we'll get you back to health. We'll figure this out." The lion's eyes closed, and in that moment Eli understood something. He had saved the lion's life, but in doing so, he had unknowingly opened the door to something much more profound. A bond forged in the quiet hours of the savannah, between man and beast. As the fire crackled beside him, Eli whispered into the night, a quiet promise carried by the wind. "I'll be here. I won't leave you." The days stretched into weeks as Eli remained with Kazi the lion. Each passing hour saw the massive creature's strength slowly return. At first, the lion rested more than it moved, the wound on its paw healing under Eli's careful attention. But as the swelling began to go down and the infection subsided, Kasi grew more alert, watching Eli with a silent intensity that made the young man feel both humbled and awed. Eli knew that Kasi was still an untamed animal, a force of nature that could easily turn on him if he made the wrong move. Yet every time he looked into those amber eyes, he saw something more than the raw ferocity of the wild. There was an intelligence there, a quiet understanding that neither man nor beast fully understood. They lived together in the small camp. Eli had set up near the riverbed, a thin sliver of shelter under the vast, unforgiving sky. Eli had brought enough supplies to last a while, but he knew he couldn't stay forever. His research had to continue, and there were people waiting for his reports. Yet, as the days passed, he found himself thinking less about the research and more about the lion beside him. Every evening, as the golden light of the sun dipped below the horizon, Eli would sit near the fire, watching the world turn to twilight. Kazi, though not far from him, always kept a safe distance. The lion would pace for hours, head held high, eyes scanning the savannah, but never straying too far from Eli's camp. It was as though he felt the pull of the man's presence, the strange bond that had begun to form between them. There were moments when Eli would speak to Kasi, not expecting a response, but simply for the comfort of the sound. "You know," he would say, "I've never really had anyone to talk to. Out here, it's just me and the animals." Kasi, of course, never replied. He would just tilt his head slightly, eyes glinting in the firelight as if trying to decide whether Eli was being serious or just passing time. But Eli could sense something in the air, a connection that went beyond words. The first time Kasi let Eli get close to him was by accident. Eli had been sitting near the fire, sharpening his knife, when the lion wandered over, drawn by the scent of roasting meat. At first, Eli froze, not knowing how to react. He had always been cautious around wild animals, even if he had spent years studying them, but Kasi was different. He had seen the lion up close during their days together, but this was the first time the creature moved toward him with such calmness, as if testing the waters. Kazi sniffed the air, his large nostrils flaring as he looked down at the meat roasting on the spit. He didn't seem hungry, there was no desperation in his movements. Eli took a deep breath and slowly offered Kazi a small piece of the meat. It was raw, but the lion wasn't looking for cooked food. The gesture was simple, but it carried an unspoken message. I trust you. Kazi hesitated at first. Then, with a movement almost imperceptible, he reached out and gently took the piece of meat from Eli's hand. The feeling of the lion's warm breath against his fingers sent a thrill down Eli's spine. For the first time, the lion allowed himself to get close enough to be touched. There was no violence, no sudden shift of anger, just a calmness, a quiet understanding. As Kazi chewed on the meat, Eli looked into the lion's eyes, and for that brief moment time seemed to stand still. Eli smiled softly. That's it, he whispered. You don't have to be afraid. For the next few days, the lion grew accustomed to Eli's presence, though still with a cautious distance. Kazi would rest a few paces away from the fire each night, his eyes following Eli's every movement. Sometimes the lion would nudge his head toward the campfire, a silent invitation to come closer, but always pulling back before they could touch. It was a fragile trust, one that Eli could not force or rush. He had learned long ago that the wild could not be tamed by force, and the same applied to the creatures of the savannah. The bond grew stronger each day, but Eli knew it wasn't fully secure. There were moments when Kasi would retreat into the thicket, his golden form disappearing into the shadows, and Eli would feel that familiar pang of worry. He knew, deep down, that the lion was still a wild creature. There was no guarantee that he wouldn't turn on him at any given moment. But the truth was, Eli couldn't bring himself to leave. The solitude of the savannah was unlike any place he had ever known, and Kasi, though untamed, had become the closest thing to a friend he had. It wasn't just the lion's strength or majesty that drew him in it was the quiet companionship, the unspoken bond that formed between them as they shared the silence of the vast landscape. As the days wore on, Eli began to notice that Kasi had become more and more responsive to his presence. The lion would follow him as he moved around the camp, its steps silent but sure. Sometimes Kasi would circle the camp, his amber eyes scanning the perimeter, but always returning to where Eli sat as if checking that the man was still there. One afternoon, after Eli had spent several hours documenting wildlife in the area, he returned to camp to find Kasi lying near the fire, basking in the fading sunlight. There was something different in the air that day, a change in the way the lion watched him. For the first time, Kazi's eyes were soft. Not filled with the sharp edge of a predator's watchfulness, but with something gentler, something that Eli could only describe as acceptance. Eli knelt down beside the lion, feeling a strange comfort in the presence of the beast. He knew that Kasi was still wild, but in some quiet part of his heart, Eli realized that he no longer feared the lion. I never thought I'd be here with you, Kasi, Eli said softly, reaching out to stroke the lion's mane. I never thought I'd be this close to something so powerful, so free. For the briefest moment, Kasi leaned into the touch, his body warm and solid beneath Eli's hand. It was a gesture of trust, of mutual understanding, but as the sun dipped below the horizon and the coolness of night began to settle in, the reality of their world returned. They were both creatures of the wild, both bound to it in different ways, and while there was a connection between them, it was fragile. It was the kind of bond that could break with a single wrong move, yet for that fleeting moment, in the quiet of the savannah, Eli understood something deeper than his years of research could ever teach him. The wilderness wasn't just a place to study, it was a place to learn. And sometimes, the greatest lessons came not from the animals themselves, but from the bonds they formed with the ones who chose to stay. 10 years passed like a slow, steady tide, carrying Eli far from the wild savannah that had once been his home. He had made a name for himself in the world of wildlife research, publishing papers, working with conservation groups, and traveling to distant corners of the earth. But in the years since his time with Kazi, a nagging emptiness had taken root. In his heart, Eli had never fully understood why the bond he'd shared with the lion had affected him so deeply. He had worked with animals for years, had spent countless hours in the field, observing their behavior and learning from them. But Kazi had been different. He was more than a subject of study. He had been a friend, a companion, and a reminder of a world beyond science. As the years passed, Eli found himself drifting farther away from that part of himself. The daily grind of research, meetings, and deadlines had pulled him into a world that felt more artificial by the day. He missed the silence of the savannah, the vast, open sky, and the rawness of life that came with being out there with the animals. Yet, despite his yearning to return, there was always something that held him back. Fear, perhaps, or maybe a sense of guilt. He had promised Kazi that he would return, but life had a way of getting in the way of promises, and so he moved on. But the memories never left him. Kazi's eyes, full of quiet wisdom and unspoken understanding, haunted his thoughts on long, lonely nights. It was during a trip to a conservation project in Central Africa that Eli's life took another turn. He was deep in the jungle, cataloging endangered species, when he received an unexpected message from an old colleague back in Africa. The email simply read, "Eli, I think you need to come back. Something's happened. We found Kazi." The words were like a punch to the gut. At first, Eli thought it was a mistake or some kind of cruel joke, but as he read on, the details became clear. Kazi had been spotted by a local tracker near the same area where Eli had once cared for him. He was alive, though weathered, and no longer the proud, powerful creature he had been. Eli's heart raced. He knew he couldn't ignore this. He had to return. Weeks later, Eli found himself standing in the same savannah where he had once saved Kazi's life. The land hadn't changed much except for the scars left by time and drought. The grass was thinner now, and the trees seemed smaller, less imposing than he remembered. He felt a pang of guilt at the thought that he had abandoned this place. For so long, the tracker who had spotted Eli to a distant part of the savannah, far from the camp where they had first met. The lion had been seen in the area, but no one had been able to get close enough to approach him. He was a shadow now, a ghost of the lion he once was. As they approached a thicket of tall grass, Eli's pulse quickened. There, lying in the shade of a tree, was a figure that made his heart skip. It was Kazi, but he was not the same lion that Eli had saved a decade ago. His coat was matted with dirt and scars, his mane frayed and ragged. His once proud stance was now weary, his body thinner, almost skeletal. His eyes, though still the same amber color, lacked the same fierceness they had once held. There was something sad and resigned in them now. For a moment, Eli simply stood there, unable to move. The lion's presence was still powerful, but it was a shadow of the force of nature Eli had once known. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable, as Kazi slowly raised his head and looked at Eli. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. Eli's breath caught in his throat as he looked into the lion's eyes. There was no recognition, no joy at seeing him again. But there was something deeper, something that Eli couldn't quite place. Kazi's gaze was not angry nor fearful, but distant, as though the lion had lived a lifetime since they last met. Eli swallowed hard. "Kazi," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "It's me. I promised I'd come back. The lion's head lowered again, and he turned slowly, as though deciding whether or not to leave. Eli's heart twisted painfully in his chest. Had the lion forgotten him? Had the years of separation erased their bond? The tracker stepped forward cautiously, sensing Eli's turmoil. "He's been living like this for a while," he said gently. "He's alone. There's nothing we can do to bring him back to what he was." Eli nodded, his throat tight. The tracker was right. The lion wasn't just old and scarred. He had been living in survival mode for years, disconnected from human intervention, from the comfort and care Eli had once given him, but Eli couldn't give up that easily. He moved forward slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "Kazi," he said again, his voice filled with quiet desperation. I never meant to leave you. I never meant to abandon you. Kazi lifted his head again, his eyes locking with Eli's for a fleeting moment. There was recognition there. A flicker of something deep and unspoken. Then, without another sound, Kazi rose to his feet, his body heavy with the weight of age and survival. He took a few slow steps away, disappearing into the tall grass once more, vanishing into the shadows of the savannah. Eli stood there for a long time, the words hanging in the air between them. The silence louder than anything he had ever heard. The lion was still out there. But the bond they once shared had been fractured by time and distance. And in that moment, Eli realized something he had known deep down all along. The wild couldn't be controlled. It couldn't be held on to. The animals lived by their own rules, and sometimes they left you behind. Eli stayed for another day, searching the savannah, but Kazi never appeared again. The tracker offered no comfort, only silent understanding. As Eli left the savannah, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had come too late, that he had missed the chance to reconnect, to heal the bond that had been so powerful once. But deep in his heart, he knew that Kazi was still out there. The lion had been wild, and perhaps it was always meant to be that way. The savannah was calling again. And Eli, though heartbroken, knew that he couldn't stay in one place for too long. The wild had its own way of healing, its own rhythm. And no one, not even the bond between man and beast, could change that. The weeks that followed Eli's return to the savannah were long and silent. The vibrant energy he had once felt for his work had dulled, replaced by a quiet, gnawing sense of emptiness. Even as he ventured into different areas of the African wilderness to study other species, his thoughts continually circled back to Kazi. The lion's fading presence haunted him, a shadow in the corner of his mind that refused to be ignored. Eli knew he had missed his chance to reconnect with Kazi. The savannah had moved on, and so had the lion. Kazi had lived a life on his own terms, and Eli, despite his best intentions, was an outsider in that world now. But as the days passed, something deep within Eli told him that the story wasn't over. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something he needed to do. He had come back, after all, for Kazi, but what if the lion was in danger? What if the very wild that had once been Kazi's kingdom had now become a threat to him? One early morning, as Eli packed up his supplies for another day of observation, the uneasy feeling in his gut grew stronger. The air was thick with the scent of coming rain, and the clouds hung heavy in the sky. Something was off. He had barely walked a mile when he came across the first sign. It was a set of footprints, distinctive, wide and heavy. They belonged to a lion. But these prints were unlike the graceful, powerful tracks Eli had seen Kazi leave behind years ago. These tracks were different, jagged, uneven, as if the lion had been struggling to move, dragging its paws across the earth. Eli's heart skipped a beat. Could it be Kazi? His pulse quickened as he followed the tracks deeper into the thicket, his mind racing. The lion had been spotted recently in this area, but no one had been able to get close enough to confirm its identity. Eli had no way of knowing for sure, but something about the tracks told him that this wasn't just any lion. The trail led him to a small clearing, where the tall grass swayed in the wind. And there, in the center of the clearing, Eli saw it, *a snare. It was an old poacher's trap, hidden beneath the grass, its steel wires gleaming ominously in the dim light. The trap was set to catch large animals, and the fact that it was still active made Eli's stomach turn. This wasn't just an accident. Someone had purposefully set this trap, and if Kazi had been caught in it, Eli's throat tightened as he knelt beside the snare. There were fresh markings on the ground, scuff marks and broken branches. He could tell that something large had struggled against the trap. Kazi, Eli knew it in his bones. The lion had been caught. The lion who had once saved him, the lion who had been both his friend and his lesson, now was trapped by the very land that had once been his. There was no time to waste. Eli immediately reached into his pack and pulled out his knife. He had worked with poachers' traps before, studying them in the field to help track illegal hunting operations, but this was different. This was Kazi. His hands were shaking, but he focused. He had saved Kazi once before, and now it was his turn to do the same. Eli set to work, trying to pry apart the thick steel wires. He knew time was running out. Every moment he wasted could mean more damage to the lion's leg. Suddenly, a low, painful growl echoed through the clearing, sending a chill down Eli's spine. He froze, his knife still in hand. There, emerging from the dense brush, was Kazi. The lion limped forward, his eyes wild and filled with pain. His once proud form was now a shadow of what it had been, his fur matted, his body thin, but his presence was still that of the king of the savannah. Eli's heart ached at the sight of him. The lion's leg was mangled, blood staining his golden fur, but his spirit was still there, untamed. Despite the pain, Kazi's eyes locked onto Eli's, filled with an understanding that transcended words. "Don't move," Eli said softly, his voice hoarse. "I'm not going to hurt you." Kazi stopped a few paces away, his massive frame trembling with exhaustion and pain. The snare had clearly taken its toll on him, and Eli could see the way the lion favored his injured leg. Eli approached slowly, keeping his movements calm and measured. His heart was racing, but he had no choice but to remain steady. The last thing Kazi needed was fear or hesitation. He needed to know that Eli was there for him, just like the first time they met. "I've got you," Eli whispered, kneeling beside the lion. He reached for the snare around Kazi's leg, carefully working at the wires with his knife. The lion's eyes never left him, watching with a mix of caution and trust. It was as if Kazi knew that Eli was the only one who could help him now. It took every ounce of Eli's focus to free the lion, but finally, with a sharp snap, the snare came loose. Kazi stumbled, his injured leg giving way beneath him. Eli caught the lion's body, steadying him with all his strength. The weight of Kazi's body was overwhelming, but Eli didn't flinch. He had been here before. He had seen Kazi through pain before, and he would do it again. The lion let out a soft, mournful growl, but there was no aggression in it, only the weary sound of a creature who had survived for too long on his own. "It's okay," Eli murmured, his fingers brushing through Kazi's matted mane. "You're safe now." For a moment there was a strange silence between them, no growl, no roar, just the sound of heavy breathing. Kazi rested his head on Eli's shoulder, his eyes closing, as if accepting the help, as if the bond they shared had never truly broken. Eli could feel the heat of the lion's body, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, and in that moment something in his heart shifted. He realized that this wasn't just about saving Kazi, it was about both of them finding healing. Eli sat there for a long time, holding the lion steady until the weight of the moment began to lift. The pain of the past had made them both stronger, more resilient, more aware of the wild nature that ran through their veins. Eli had saved Kazi once, and now in the quiet of the savannah, Kazi had returned the favor, but the truth was undeniable. Kazi's life was fragile now, and so was Eli's. The wild had a way of taking, but it also had a way of giving, and Eli wasn't going to let go, not this time. It had been days since Eli freed Kazi from the poacher's snare. The lion was recovering, but it was clear that the wound on his leg had left him weaker than before. Eli had set up a small shelter, keeping the area hidden from view, and had used his knowledge of the savannah to forage for herbs and plants to ease Kazi's pain. Though Kazi was still strong in spirit, his body no longer carried the same power it once had. The bond between them was undeniable now. It wasn't just the bond of man and animal, or researcher and subject, it was the bond of survival, of shared history and mutual respect. Kazi trusted Eli in a way that went beyond instinct. And in return, Eli felt a deeper connection to the lion, something more profound than anything he had ever experienced. Eli knew this wasn't the end of their story, though. The savannah was unforgiving. The world had a way of taking what it wanted, and Kazi, despite his strength and resilience, was no exception. He was not the king he once was, and the wild that had once been his domain had begun to close in on him. One morning, after a restless night spent awake, keeping watch over Kazi, Eli woke to the sound of distant thunder. Dark clouds rolled in from the horizon, thick and heavy. The storm would hit soon, but there was something else in the air, a tension that made Eli's skin prickle. He felt it deep in his gut. Something was wrong. Kazi had been restless for hours, pacing back and forth around the small camp. The lion's golden coat shimmered faintly under the growing gloom, but there was a certain unease in his movements. His ears flicked at every sound, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. "Hey, it's all right," Eli whispered, stepping carefully toward the lion. "We'll wait the storm out." There's no need to go anywhere, but Kazi wasn't listening. He continued pacing, his tail swishing with anxiety. Eli felt a sudden flash of worry. The lion had been acting strangely, as if sensing danger, and then from the edge of the camp, there was a low, rumbling growl. Eli froze. It wasn't Cassie. The sound was too deep, too predatory. His heart hammered in his chest as he turned toward the noise, his eyes scanning the shadows of the trees. Another growl followed, louder this time, and Eli's pulse quickened. It was the unmistakable sound of a lion's roar, but not Kazi's. It was an outsider. A male lion. Eli's mind raced. There was no mistaking it. Male lions fought for territory, for dominance. And Kasi, though still a formidable creature in his own right, was no longer the king of the savannah. He had been weakened by the snare, by the wounds, and by years of living alone. He was no match for a fresh, powerful rival. Kazi's head snapped toward the direction of the growls. His amber eyes were wide with the instinctive fear of a creature who knew he was no longer at the top of the food chain. "Stay close," Eli muttered, his voice tight with fear. But even as he spoke, Kazi's head lifted, his body trembling with the uncertainty of what was to come. The air crackled with tension. The storm was almost upon them, the thunder louder now, but it was the distant roar of the rival lion that sent a chill down Eli's spine. It was closing in. Without warning, Kazi let out a deafening roar of his own, a defiant cry that echoed through the savannah. Eli's heart skipped a beat, knowing that the lion had just declared his presence to the world. But it wasn't the triumphant roar Eli remembered. It was a cry of desperation, a plea for survival. The rival lion's response came swiftly, a low, rumbling growl, followed by the heavy sound of paws crashing through the underbrush. Eli's blood ran cold. There was no time to run, no time to hide. The battle had already begun. "Kazi!" Eli shouted, but the lion was already moving, limping toward the sounds of the approaching male. The distance between them was closing. Quickly, Eli could feel the ground beneath his feet shaking as the two lions came closer. And then, in a burst of motion, Kazi charged toward the rival lion, despite his injured leg. "Kazi, no!" Eli cried out, his voice panicked. He could see the lion's body trembling, his strength fading. But the fire in his eyes, his unwavering will to defend his territory, his very existence was undeniable. It was then that Eli saw a flash of movement behind the trees. A lion, its massive body silhouetted against the stormy sky. The rival male was huge, its body rippling with muscle, its mane wild and untamed. This was the lion that would challenge Kazi, the one that would take what was once his, but Kazi wasn't. Giving up, the lion launched himself at the rival with everything he had left in him, the sound of claws scraping against the earth filling the air. Eli could only watch in horror as the two lions collided in a blur of teeth and claws, each one fighting for dominance. Eli's chest tightened, and for a brief moment he found himself frozen. He wanted to run, to intervene, but he knew better. This was the way of the wild. Kazi had made his choice. He was going to fight for his life, just as he had fought for his freedom all those years ago when Eli had first found him. The storm hit, then rain pouring down in sheets, thunder cracking in the sky. The fight raged on, the lions locked in a deadly embrace, each one struggling for control. Eli felt helpless, the fury of the wild unfolding before him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the battle began to slow. Kazi, exhausted, limped back a few steps, his body covered in blood, his breath ragged. The rival lion, though also wounded, stood tall, his muscles rippling beneath his golden fur. For a moment, the two lions stared each other down, panting, sizing each other up. And then, as if acknowledging the power of the other, the rival lion turned and slunk away into the shadows, leaving Kazi standing, bruised and battered, But victorious. Eli rushed forward, his heart in his throat. Kazi, he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. You did it, you're alive. Kazi's body was covered in deep gashes, his fur torn in places, but there was a fire in his eyes, still faint, but alive. He turned toward Eli, his breathing heavy, his body trembling. With exhaustion. Eli gently placed his hand on the lion's shoulder, feeling the warmth of the animal beneath his touch. In that moment, the storm didn't matter. The savannah didn't matter. All that mattered was the bond they had shared, the trust, the love, the sacrifice. Kazi had survived, but Eli knew that this victory came at a cost. The savannah was a ruthless place, and while Kazi had fought off his rival, there was no guarantee that the lion's time on this earth was long. The wild took and it gave, but it was never kind. And no one could escape its grasp forever. As the rain poured down, soaking them both, Eli made a silent promise to the lion. He wouldn't abandon him again. Not ever. Kazi had saved him once, and now it was Eli's turn to stay. Together, they would face whatever came next. And when the storm passed, Eli would be there, not just as a man who once cared for the lion, but as a friend, a companion, and a guardian in a world that would never show them mercy. As the final moments tick away, remember, this isn't just an auction. It's a chance to change the course of lives. To own not just a piece of history, but a piece of something far greater. A legacy. The story of Eli and Kazi, bound by fate, survival, and undying loyalty, is more than a tale. It's a symbol of resilience, of love that transcends the wildest of obstacles. You have one last chance to make your mark. Your bid today isn't just a purchase. It's a chance to stand with them in the fight for survival, to honor their bond. The auction is closing, and the final bid will decide. Will you be the one to carry their story forward? Place your bid now and be part of something unforgettable.